Unscrupulous people like this young woman are trying to instill their false ideas in weak, suggestible minds, with the one aim of making money and gaining personal power. The German historian Franz Herbert, currently working at the Goethe Institute in London, has a different idea. The established religions no longer ask fundamental questions about our identity and our reasons for living. Instead, they concentrate purely on a series of dogmas and rules concerned only with fitting in with a particular social and political organization. People in search of real spirituality are, therefore, setting off in new directions, and that inevitably means a return to the past and to primitive religions, before those religions were contaminated by the structures of power. At the police station where the incident was recorded, Sergeant William Morton stated that should Shireen Khalil's group decide to hold their meeting on the following Monday and feel that they are under threat, then they must apply in writing for police protection and thus avoid a repetition of last night's events. With additional information from Andrew Fish, photos by Mark Gillam. Helen Ryan, journalist. I read the report on the plane when I was flying back from the Ukraine, feeling full of doubts. I still hadn't managed to ascertain whether the Chernobyl disaster had been as big as it was said to have been, or whether it had been used by the major oil producers to inhibit the use of other sources of energy. Anyway, I was horrified by what I read in the article. The photos showed broken windows, a furious Reverend Buck, and, there lay the danger, a beautiful woman with fiery eyes and her son in her arms. I saw at once what could happen, both good and bad. I went straight from the airport to Portobello, convinced that both my predictions would become reality. On the positive side, the following Monday's meeting was one of the most successful events in the area's history. Many local people came, some curious to see the being mentioned in the article, others bearing placards defending freedom of religion and freedom of speech. The venue would only hold 200 people, and so the rest of the crowd were all crammed together on the pavement outside, hoping for at least a glimpse of the woman who appeared to be the priestess of the oppressed. When she arrived, she was received with applause, handwritten notes and requests for help. Some people threw flowers, and one lady of uncertain age asked her to keep on fighting for women's freedom and for the right to worship the Mother. The parishioners from the week before must have been intimidated by the crowd and so failed to turn up, despite the threats they had made during the previous days. There were no aggressive comments, and the ceremony passed off as normal, with dancing, the appearance of Hagia Sophia — by then I knew that she was simply another facet of Athena herself — and a final celebration. This had been added recently, when the group moved to the warehouse lent by one of its original members. And that was that. During her sermon, Athena spoke as if possessed by someone else. We all have a duty to love, and to allow love to manifest itself in the way it thinks best. We cannot and must not be frightened when the powers of darkness want to make themselves heard. Those same powers that introduced the word sin, merely to control our hearts and minds. Jesus Christ, whom we all know, turned to the woman taken in adultery and said, "Has no man condemned thee? Neither do I condemn thee." He healed people on the Sabbath. He allowed a prostitute to wash his feet. He promised a thief that he would enjoy the delights of paradise. He ate forbidden foods, and he said that we should concern ourselves only with today, because the lilies in the field toil not, neither do they spin, but are arrayed in glory. What is sin? It is a sin to prevent love from showing itself, and the Mother is love. We are entering a new world in which we can choose to follow our own footsteps, not those that society forces us to take. If necessary, we will confront the forces of darkness again, as we did last week. But no one will silence our voice or our heart. I was witnessing the transformation of a woman into an icon. She spoke with great conviction, with dignity, and with faith in what she was saying. I hoped that things really were like that we truly were entering a new world, and that I would live to see it. She left the warehouse to as much acclaim as she had entered it, and when she saw me in the crowd, she called me over and said that she'd missed me. She was happy and confident, sure that she was doing the right thing. This was the positive side of the newspaper article, and things might have ended there. I wanted my analysis of events to be wrong, but 3 days later my prediction was confirmed. The negative side emerged in full force. Employing the services of one of the most highly regarded and conservative law practices in Britain, whose senior partners, unlike Athena, really did have contacts in all spheres of the government, and basing his case on published statements made by Athena, the Reverend Buck called a news conference to say that he was suing for defamation, calumny, and moral damages. The deputy editor called me in. He knew I was friendly with the central figure in that scandal, and suggested that we publish an exclusive interview. My first reaction was of disgust. How could I use my friendship to sell newspapers? However, after we had talked further, I started to think that it might be a good idea. She would have the chance to present her side of the story. Indeed, she could use the interview to promote all the things for which she was now openly fighting. I left the deputy editor's office with the plan we had drawn up together, a series of articles on new trends in society and on radical changes that were taking place in the search for religious belief. In one of those articles, I would publish Athena's point of view. That same afternoon, I went to her house, taking advantage of the fact that the invitation had come from her when we met outside the warehouse. The neighbours told me that the day before, court officials had attempted to serve a summons on her, but failed. I phoned later on, without success. I tried again as night was falling, but no one answered. From then on, I phoned every half an hour, growing more anxious with each call. Ever since Hagia Sophia had cured my insomnia, tiredness drove me to bed at 11 o'clock, but this time anxiety kept me awake. I found her mother's number in the phone book, but it was late, and if Athena wasn't there, then I would only cause the whole family to worry. What to do? I turned on the TV to see if anything had happened. Nothing special. London continued as before, with its marvels and its perils. I decided to try one last time. The phone rang 3 times and someone answered. I recognized Andrea's voice at once. "What do you want?" she asked. Athena asked me to get in touch. Is everything all right? Everything's all right and not all right, depending on your way of looking at things. But I think you might be able to help. Where is she? She hung up without saying any more. Deirdre O'Neill, known as Edda. Athena stayed in a hotel near my house. News from London regarding local events, especially minor conflicts in the suburbs, never reaches Scotland. We're not much interested in how the English sort out their little problems. We have our own flag, our own football team, and soon we will have our own parliament. I let Athena rest for a whole day. The following morning, instead of going into the little temple and performing the rituals I know, I decided to take her and her son to a wood near Edinburgh. There, while the boy played and ran about among the trees, she told me in detail what was going on. When she'd finished, I said, "It's daylight, the sky is cloudy, and human beings believe that beyond the clouds lives an all-powerful God guiding the fate of men. Meanwhile, look at your son. Look at your feet. Listen to the sounds around you. Down here is the mother, so much closer, bringing joy to children and energy to those who walk over her body. Why do people prefer to believe in something far away and forget what is there before their eyes, a true manifestation of the miracle?" "I know the answer, because up there someone is guiding us and giving his orders, hidden behind the clouds, unquestionable in his wisdom. Down here we have physical contact with the magical reality, and the freedom to choose where our steps will go." Exactly. But do you think that is what people want? Do they want the freedom to choose their own steps? Yes, I think they do. The earth I'm standing on now has laid out many strange paths for me. From a village in Transylvania to a city in the Middle East, from there to another city on an island, and then to the desert and back to Transylvania. From a suburban bank to a real estate company in the Persian Gulf, from a dance group to a Bedouin. And whenever my feet drove me onward, I said yes, instead of saying no. And what did you gain from all that? Today I can see people's auras. I can awake the mother in my soul. My life now has meaning, and I know what I'm fighting for. But why do you ask? You too gained the most important power of all, the gift of healing. Andrea can now prophesy and converse with spirits. I followed her spiritual development every step of the way. What else have you gained? The joy of being alive. I know that I'm here and that everything is a miracle, a revelation. The little boy fell over and grazed his knee. Instinctively, Athena ran to him, wiped the wound clean, told him not to worry, and the boy continued running about in the forest. I used that as a signal. What just happened to your little boy happened to me. And it's happening to you too, isn't it? Yes, but I don't think I stumbled and fell. I think I'm being tested again, and that my next step will be revealed to me. At such moments, a teacher must say nothing, only bless the disciple. Because however much the teacher may want to save her disciple from suffering, the paths are mapped out and the disciple's feet are eager to follow them. I suggested we go back to the wood that night, just the two of us. She asked where she could leave her son, and I said I would take care of that. I had a neighbor who owed me a favor, and who would be delighted to look after Virel. As evening fell, we returned to that same place, and on the way we spoke of things that had nothing to do with the ritual we were about to perform. Athena had seen me using a new kind of depilatory wax, and was intrigued to know what advantages it had over the old methods. We talked animatedly about vanity, fashion, the cheapest places to buy clothes, female behavior, feminism, hairstyles. At one point she said something along the lines of, "But if the soul is ageless, I don't know why we should be so worried about all this," then realized that it was all right just to relax and talk about superficial subjects. More than that, such conversations were really fun, and how we look is something that's still very important in women's lives. It is in men's lives too, but in a different way, and they're not as open about it as we are. As we approached the place I'd chosen, or rather which the wood was choosing for me, I started to feel the presence of the mother. In my case, this presence manifests itself in a certain mysterious inner joy that always touches me and almost moves me to tears. It was the moment to stop and change the subject. "Collect some wood for kindling," I said. "But it's dark." "There's enough light from the full moon, even if it's obscured by clouds. Train your eyes. They were made to see more than you think." She began doing as I asked, occasionally cursing because she'd scratched herself on a thorn. Almost half an hour passed, and during that time we didn't talk. I felt the excitement of knowing that the mother was close by. The euphoria of being there with that woman, who still seemed little more than a child, and who trusted me, and was keeping me company in the search that sometimes seemed too mad for the human mind. Athena was still at the stage of answering questions, just as she'd responded to mine that afternoon. I had been like that once, until I allowed myself to be transported completely into the kingdom of mystery, where it was simply a matter of contemplating, celebrating, worshipping, praising, and allowing the gift to manifest itself. I was watching Athena collecting firewood, and I saw the girl I once was, in search of veiled secrets and secret powers. Life had taught me something completely different. The powers were not secret, and the secrets had been revealed a long time ago. When I saw that she had gathered enough firewood, I indicated that she should stop. I myself looked for some larger branches and put them on top of the kindling. And so it was in life. In order for the more substantial pieces of wood to catch fire, the kindling must burn first. In order for us to liberate the energy of our strength, our weakness must first have a chance to reveal itself. In order for us to understand the powers we carry within us and the secrets that have already been revealed, it was first necessary to allow the surface, expectations, fears, appearances, to be burned away. We were entering the peace now settling upon the forest, with the gentle wind, the moonlight behind the clouds, the noises of the animals that sally forth at night to hunt, thus fulfilling the cycle of birth and death of the mother, and without ever being criticized for following their instincts and their nature. I lit the fire. Neither of us felt like saying anything. For what seemed like an eternity, we merely contemplated the dance of the fire, knowing that hundreds of thousands of people all over the world would also be sitting by their fireside, regardless of whether they had modern heating systems in their house or not. They did this because they were sitting before a symbol. It took a great effort to emerge from that trance, which, although it meant nothing specific to me, and did not make me see gods, auras, or ghosts, nonetheless left me in the state of grace I needed to be in. I focused once more on the present, on the young woman by my side, on the ritual I needed to perform. "How is your student?" I asked. "Difficult, but if she wasn't, I might not learn what I need to learn." "And what powers is she developing?" "She speaks with beings in the parallel world." "As you converse with Hagia Sophia?" "No, as you well know, Hagia Sophia is the mother manifesting herself in me. She speaks with invisible beings." I knew this, but I wanted to be sure. Athena was more silent than usual. I don't know if she had discussed the events in London with Andrea, but that didn't matter. I got up, opened the bag I had with me, took out a handful of specially chosen herbs, and threw them into the flames. "The wood has started to speak," said Athena, as if this was something perfectly normal. And that was good. It meant that miracles were now becoming part of her life. "What is it saying?" "Nothing at the moment, only noises." Minutes later, she heard a song coming from the fire. "Oh, it's wonderful." There spoke the little girl, not the wife or mother. "Stay just as you are. Don't try to concentrate or follow my steps or understand what I'm saying. Relax and feel good. That is sometimes all we can hope for from life." I knelt down, picked up a red-hot piece of wood and drew a circle around her, leaving a small opening through which I could enter. I could hear the same music as Athena, and I danced around her, invoking the union of the male fire with the earth, which received it now with arms and legs spread wide. The fire that purified everything, transforming into energy the strength contained in the firewood, in those branches, in those beings, both human and invisible. I danced for as long as the melody from the fire lasted, and I made protective gestures to the child, who was sitting smiling inside the circle. When the flames had burned down, I took a little ash and sprinkled it on Athena's head. Then, with my feet, I erased the circle I'd drawn around her. "Thank you," she said. "I felt very loved, wanted, protected." In difficult moments, remember that feeling. Now that I've found my path, there will be no more difficult moments. After all, I have a mission to fulfill, don't I? Yes, we all have a mission to fulfill. She started to feel uncertain. "And what about the difficult moments?" she asked. That isn't an intelligent thing to ask. Remember what you said just now. You are loved, wanted, protected. "I'll do my best." Her eyes filled with tears. Athena had understood my answer. Samira R. Khalil, housewife. My own grandson. What kind of world are we living in? Are we still in the Middle Ages, engaging in witch hunts? I ran to him. He had a bloody nose, but he didn't seem to care about my distress and pushed me away. I know how to defend myself, and I did. I may never have produced a child in my own womb, but I know the hearts of children. I was far more worried about Athena than I was about Viorel. This was just one of many fights he would have to face in his life, and there was a flicker of pride in his swollen eyes. Some children at school say that Mom was a devil worshipper. Shireen arrived shortly afterward, soon enough to see the boy's bloodied face and to kick up a fuss. She wanted to go straight to the school and talk to the head teacher. But first I put my arms around her. I let her cry out all her tears and all her frustrations. And the best thing I could do then was to keep silent and try to convey my love for her through that silence. When she had calmed down a little, I explained carefully that she could come back home and live with us, that we would take care of everything. When her father read about the case being brought against her, he had immediately spoken to some lawyers. We would do everything we could to get her out of this situation, regardless of comments from the neighbors, ironic looks from acquaintances, and the false solidarity of friends. Nothing in the world was more important than my daughter's happiness. Even though I had never understood why she always had to choose the most difficult and painful of paths. But a mother doesn't have to understand anything. She simply has to love and protect. And feel proud. Knowing that we could give her almost everything, she, nevertheless, set off early in search of her independence. She'd had her stumbles and her failures, but she insisted on facing any storms alone. She went looking for her mother, aware of the risks she was running. And in the end, that encounter brought her closer to us. I knew she had never once heeded my advice. Get a degree, get married, put up with the problems of living with someone without complaint. Don't try to go beyond the limits set by society. And what had been the result? By following my daughter's story, I became a better person. Obviously, I didn't understand about the mother goddess or Athena's need always to surround herself with strangers, or her inability to be content with all that she'd achieved after so much work. But deep down, even though it may be rather late in the day for such ideas, I wish I could have been like her. I was about to get up and prepare something to eat, but she stopped me. I want to stay here for a while with your arms around me. That's all I need. Viorel, go and watch TV. I want to talk to your grandmother. The boy obeyed. I must have caused you a lot of suffering. Not at all. On the contrary, you and your son are the source of all our joy and our reason for living. But I haven't exactly... I'm glad it's been the way it has. I can say it now. There were moments when I hated you, when I bitterly regretted not having followed the advice of that nurse and adopted another baby. Then I'd ask myself, how can a mother hate her own daughter? I took tranquilizers, played bridge with my friends, went on shopping sprees, and all to make up for the love I'd given you, and which I felt I wasn't getting back. A few months ago, when you decided to give up yet another job that was bringing you both money and prestige, I was in despair. I went to the local church. I wanted to make a promise to the Virgin and beg her to bring you back to reality, to force you to change your life and make the most of the chances you were throwing away. I was ready to do anything in exchange for that. I stood looking at the Virgin and Child, and I said, you are a mother and you know what's happening. Ask anything of me, but save my child, because I think she's bent on self-destruction. I felt Shireen's arms holding me tighter. She was crying again, but her tears were different this time. I was doing my best to control my feelings. And do you know what I felt at that moment? I felt that she was talking to me and saying, listen, Samira, that's what I thought too. I suffered for years because my son wouldn't listen to anything I said. I used to worry about his safety. I didn't like the friends he chose, and he showed no respect for laws, customs, religion, or his elders. Need I go on? Yes. I'd like to hear the rest of the story. The Virgin concluded by saying, "But my son didn't listen to me, and now I'm very glad that he didn't." I gently removed myself from her embrace and got up. "You two need to eat." I went to the kitchen, prepared some onion soup and a dish of tabbouleh, warmed up some unleavened bread, put it all on the table, and we had lunch together. We talked about trivial things, which at such moments always help to bring us together and justify our pleasure at being there, quietly, even if outside a storm is uprooting trees and sowing destruction. Of course, at the end of that afternoon, my daughter and my grandson would walk out of the door to confront the winds, the thunder, and the lightning all over again. But that was their choice. "Mom, you said that you'd do anything for me, didn't you?" It was true. I would lay down my life if necessary. "Don't you think I should be prepared to do anything for Viorel too?" I think that's a mother's instinct. But instinct aside, it's the greatest proof of love there is. She continued eating. "You know that your father is happy to help with this case being brought against you. If you want him to, that is." "Of course I do. This is my family we're talking about." I thought twice, 3 times, but couldn't hold back my words. "Can I give you some advice? I know you have some influential friends, that journalist, for example. Why don't you ask him to write about your story and tell him your version of events? The press are giving a lot of coverage to that vicar, and people will end up thinking he's right. So as well as accepting what I do, you also want to help me." "Yes, Shireen, even though I may not understand you, even though I sometimes suffer as the Virgin must have suffered all her life, even if you're not Jesus Christ with an all-important message for the world, I'm on your side, and I want to see you win." Heron Ryan, journalist. Athena arrived while I was frantically making notes for what I imagined would be the ideal interview on the events in Portobello and the rebirth of the goddess. It was a very, very delicate affair. What I saw at the warehouse was a woman saying, "You can do it. Let the Great Mother teach you. Trust in love and miracles will happen." And the crowd agreed. But that wouldn't last long, because we were living in an age in which slavery was the only path to happiness. Free will demands immense responsibility. It's hard work. It brings with it anguish and suffering. "I need you to write something about me," she said. I told her that we should wait a little. After all, the whole affair could fade from view the following week. But that, meanwhile, I'd prepared a few questions about female energy. At the moment, all the fuss and the fighting is only of interest to people in the immediate area and to the tabloids. No respectable newspaper has published a single line about it. London is full of these little local disturbances, and getting into the broadsheets really isn't advisable. It would be best if the group didn't meet for 2 or 3 weeks. However, I think that the business about the goddess, if treated with the seriousness it deserves, could make a lot of people ask themselves some really important questions. "Over supper that time you said that you loved me. And now you're not only telling me you don't want to help me, you're also asking me to give up the things I believe in." How to interpret those words? Was she finally accepting the love I'd offered her that night, and which accompanied me every minute of my life? According to the Lebanese poet Khalil Gibran, it was more important to give than to receive. But while these were wise words, I was part of what is known as humanity with my frailties, my moments of indecision, my desire simply to live in peace, to be the slave of my feelings, and to surrender myself without asking any questions, without even knowing if my love was reciprocated. All she had to do was to let me love her. I was sure that Hagia Sophia would agree with me. Athena had been passing through my life now for nearly 2 years, and I was afraid she might simply continue on her way and disappear over the horizon, without my having even been able to accompany her on part of that journey. Are you talking about love? I'm asking for your help. What to do? Control myself? Stay cool? Not precipitate things and end up destroying them? Or take the step I needed to take, embrace her and protect her from all dangers? My head kept telling me to say, "Don't you worry about a thing. I love you." But instead I said, "I want to help. Please trust me. I'd do anything in the world for you, including saying no if I thought that was the right thing to do, even though you might not understand my reasoning." I told her that the deputy editor on my newspaper had proposed a series of articles about the reawakening of the goddess, which would include an interview with her. At first, it had seemed to me an excellent idea, but now I saw that it would be best to wait a little. I said, "You either carry your mission forward or you defend yourself. You're aware, I know, that what you're doing is more important than how you're seen by other people. Do you agree?" "I'm thinking of my son. Every day now he gets into some fight or argument at school." "That will pass. In a week it'll be forgotten. That will be the moment to act, not in order to defend yourself against idiotic attacks, but to set out, confidently and wisely, the true breadth of your work. And if you have any doubts about my feelings and are determined to continue, then I'll come with you to the next meeting, and we'll see what happens." The following morning I went with her to the meeting. I was not now just another person in the crowd. I could see things as she was seeing them. People crowded into the warehouse. There were flowers and applause, young women calling her the priestess of the goddess, a few smartly dressed ladies begging for a private audience because of some illness in the family. The crowd started pushing us and blocking the entrance. We had never imagined that we might need some form of security, and I was frightened. I took her arm, picked up Viorel, and we went in. Inside the packed room, a very angry Andrea was waiting for us. "I think you should tell them that you're not performing any miracles today," she shouted at Athena. "You're allowing yourself to be seduced by vanity. Why doesn't Hagia Sophia tell all these people to go away?" "Because she can diagnose illnesses," replied Athena defiantly. "And the more people who benefit from that, the better." She was about to say more, but the crowd was applauding and she stepped up onto the improvised stage. She turned on the small sound system she'd brought from home, gave instructions for people to dance against the rhythm of the music, and the ritual began. At a certain point, Viorel went and sat down in a corner. That was the moment for Hagia Sophia to appear. Athena did as I'd seen her do many times before. She abruptly turned off the music, clutched her head in her hands, and the people waited in silence, as if obeying an invisible command. The ritual followed its unvarying path. There were questions about love, which were rejected, although she agreed to comment on anxieties, illnesses, and other personal problems. From where I was, I could see that some people had tears in their eyes. Others behaved as if they were standing before a saint. Then came the moment for the closing sermon, before the group celebration of the Mother. Since I knew what would happen next, I started thinking about the best way to get out of there with the minimum of fuss. I hoped that she would take Andrea's advice and tell them not to go looking for miracles there. I went over to where Viorel was sitting, so that we could leave the place as soon as his mother had finished speaking. And that was when I heard the voice of Hagia Sophia. "Today, before we close, we're going to talk about diet. Forget all about slimming regimes." "Diet? Forget about slimming regimes?" "We have survived for all these millennia because we have been able to eat. And now that seems to have become a curse. Why? What is it that makes us, at 40 years old, want to have the same body we had when we were young? Is it possible to stop time? Of course not. And why should we be thin? I heard a kind of murmuring in the crowd. They were probably expecting a more spiritual message. We don't need to be thin. We buy books, we go to gyms, we expend a lot of brain power on trying to hold back time, when we should be celebrating the miracle of being here in this world. Instead of thinking about how to live better, we're obsessed with weight. Forget about all that. You can read all the books you want, do all the exercise you want, punish yourself as much as you want, but you will still have only two choices. Either stop living or get fat. Eat in moderation, but take pleasure in eating. It isn't what enters a person's mouth that's evil, but what leaves it. Remember that for millennia we have struggled in order to keep from starving. Whose idea was it that we had to be thin all our lives? I'll tell you. The vampires of the soul, those who are so afraid of the future that they think it's possible to stop the wheel of time. Hagia Sophia can guarantee that it's not possible. Use the energy and effort you put into dieting to nourish yourself with spiritual bread. Know that the Great Mother gives generously and wisely. Respect that, and you will get no fatter than passing time demands. Instead of artificially burning those calories, try to transform them into the energy required to fight for your dreams. No one ever stayed slim for very long just because of a diet. There was complete silence. Athena began the closing ceremony, and we all celebrated the presence of the Mother. I clasped VRL in my arms, promising myself that next time I would bring a few friends along to provide a little improvised security. We left to the same shouts and applause as when we had arrived. A shopkeeper grabbed my arm. "This is absurd. If one of my windows gets smashed, I'll sue you." Athena was laughing and giving autographs. VRL seemed happy. I just hoped that no journalist was there that night. When we finally managed to extricate ourselves from the crowd, we hailed a taxi. I asked if they would like to go somewhere to eat. "Of course," said Athena. "That's just what I've been talking about." Antoine Locadour, historian. In this long series of mistakes that came to be known as the Witch of Portobello affair, what surprises me most is the ingenuousness of Heron Ryan, an international journalist of many years' experience. When we spoke, he was horrified by the tabloid headlines. "The goddess diet," screamed one. "Get thin while you eat," says Witch of Portobello, roared another from its front page. As well as touching on the sensitive topic of religion, Athena had gone further. She had talked about diet, a subject of national interest, more important even than wars, strikes, or natural disasters. We may not all believe in God, but we all want to get thin. Reporters interviewed local shopkeepers who all swore blind that in the days preceding the mass meetings, they'd seen red and black candles being lit during rituals involving only a handful of people. It may have been nothing but cheap sensationalism, but Ryan should have foreseen that, with a court case in progress, the accuser would take every opportunity to bring to the judge's attention what he considered to be not only a calumny, but also an attack on all the values that kept society going. That same week, one of the most prestigious British newspapers published in its editorial column an article by the Reverend Ian Buck, minister at the Evangelical Church in Kensington. It said, among other things, "As a good Christian, I have a duty to turn the other cheek when I am wrongly attacked or when my honor is impugned. However, we must not forget that while Jesus may have turned the other cheek, he also used a whip to drive out those wanting to make the Lord's house into a den of thieves." That is what we are seeing at the moment in Portobello Road. Unscrupulous people who pass themselves off as savers of souls, giving false hope and promising cures for all ills, even declaring that you can stay thin and elegant if you follow their teachings. For this reason, I have no alternative but to go to the courts to prevent this situation continuing. The movement's followers swear that they are capable of awakening hitherto unknown gifts, and they deny the existence of an all-powerful God, replacing him with pagan divinities such as Venus and Aphrodite. For them, everything is permitted as long as it is done with love. But what is love? An immoral force that justifies any end? Or a commitment to society's true values such as the family and tradition? At the next meeting, foreseeing a repetition of the pitched battle of August, the police brought in half a dozen officers to avoid any confrontations. Athena arrived accompanied by a bodyguard improvised by Ryan, and this time there was not only applause, but also booing and cursing too. One woman, seeing that Athena was accompanied by a child of 5, brought a charge 2 days later under the Children Act 1989, alleging that the mother was inflicting irreversible damage on her child and that custody should be given to the father. One of the tabloids managed to track down Lucas Jessen Peterson, who refused to give an interview. He threatened the reporter, saying that if he so much as mentioned Viorel in his articles, he wouldn't be responsible for his actions. The following day, the tabloid carried the headline, "Witch of Portobello's ex would kill for son." That same afternoon, 2 more charges under the Children Act 1989 were brought before the courts, calling for the child to be taken into care. There was no meeting after that. Groups of people for and against gathered outside the door, and the uniformed officers were on hand to keep the peace. But Athena did not appear. The same thing happened the following week, only this time there were fewer crowds and fewer police. The third week, there was only the occasional bunch of flowers to be seen and someone handing out photos of Athena to passers-by. The subject disappeared from the front pages of the London dailies, and when the Reverend Ian Buck announced his decision to withdraw all charges of defamation and calumny in the Christian spirit we should show to those who repent of their actions, no major paper was interested in publishing his statement, which turned up instead on the readers' pages of some local rag. As far as I know, it never became national news, but was restricted to the pages that dealt only with London news. I visited Brighton a month after the meetings ended, and when I tried to bring the subject up with my friends there, none of them had the faintest idea what I was talking about. Ryan could have cleared up the whole business, and what his newspaper said would have been picked up by the rest of the media. To my surprise, though, he never published a line about Shireen Khalil. In my view, the crime, given its nature, had nothing to do with what happened in Portobello. It was all just a macabre coincidence. Heron Ryan, journalist. Athena asked me to turn on the tape recorder. She had brought another one with her, of a type I'd never seen before. Very sophisticated and very small. First, I wish to state that I've been receiving death threats. Second, I want you to promise that even if I die, you will wait 5 years before you allow anyone else to listen to this tape. In the future, people will be able to tell what is true and what is false. Say you agree. That way you will be entering a legally binding agreement. I agree, but I think... Don't think anything. Should I be found dead, this will be my testament, on condition that it won't be published now. I turned off the tape recorder. You have nothing to fear. I have friends in government, people who owe me favors, who need or will need me. We can... Have I mentioned before that my boyfriend works for Scotland Yard? Not that again. If he really did exist, why wasn't he there when we needed him? When both Athena and Viorel could have been attacked by the mob? Questions crowded into my mind. Was she trying to test me? What was going through that woman's mind? Was she unbalanced? Fickle? 1 hour wanting to be by my side, the next talking about this non-existent man. Turn on the tape recorder, she said. I felt terrible. I was beginning to think that she'd been using me all along. I would like to have been able to say, "Go away. Get out of my life. Ever since I first met you, everything has been a hell. All I want is for you to come here, put your arms around me and kiss me, and say you want to stay with me forever, but that never happens." Is there anything wrong? She knew there was something wrong. Or rather, she couldn't possibly not have known what I was feeling. Because I had never concealed my love for her, even though I'd only spoken openly of it once. I would cancel any appointment to see her. I was always there when she needed me. I was trying to build some kind of relationship with her son, in the belief that he would one day call me Dad. I never asked her to stop what she was doing. I accepted her way of life, her decisions. I suffered in silence when she suffered. I was glad when she triumphed. I was proud of her determination. Why did you turn off the tape recorder? I hovered for a second between heaven and hell, between rebellion and submission, between cold reason and destructive emotion. In the end, summoning up all my strength, I managed to control myself. I pressed the button. Let's continue. As I was saying, I've been receiving death threats. I've been getting anonymous phone calls. They insult me and say I'm a menace, that I'm trying to restore the reign of Satan, that they can't allow this to happen. Have you spoken to the police? I deliberately omitted any reference to her boyfriend, showing that I'd never believed that story anyway. Yes, I have. They've recorded the calls. They come from public payphones, but the police told me not to worry, that they're watching my house. They've arrested one person. He's mentally ill and believes he's the reincarnation of one of the apostles, and at this time he must fight so that Christ is not driven out again. He's in a psychiatric hospital now. The police explained that he's been in the hospital before for making similar threats to other people. If they're on the case, there's no need to worry. Our police are the best in the world. I'm not afraid of death. If I were to die today, I would carry with me moments that few people my age have had the chance to experience. What I'm afraid of, and this is why I've asked you to record our conversation today, is that I might kill someone. Kill someone? You know that there are legal proceedings underway to remove Viorel from me. I've asked friends, but no one can do anything. We just have to await the verdict. According to them, depending on the judge, of course, these fanatics will get what they want. That's why I've bought a gun. I know what it means for a child to be removed from his mother, because I've experienced it myself. And so, when the first bailiff arrives, I'll shoot, and I'll keep shooting until the bullets run out. If they don't shoot me first, I'll use the knives in my house. If they take the knives, I'll use my teeth and my nails. But no one is going to take Viorel from me, or only over my dead body. Are you recording this? I am, but there are ways. There aren't. My father is following the case. He says that when it comes to family law, there's little that can be done. Now turn off the tape recorder. Was that your testament? She didn't answer. When I did nothing, she took the initiative. She went over to the sound system and put on that music from the steps, which I now knew almost by heart. She danced as she did during the rituals, completely out of rhythm, and I knew what she was trying to do. Her tape recorder was still on, a silent witness to everything that was happening there. The afternoon sunlight was pouring in through the windows, but Athena was off in search of another light, one that had been there since the creation of the world. When she felt the spark from the mother, she stopped dancing, turned off the music, put her head in her hands and didn't move for some time. Then she raised her head and looked at me. You know who is here, don't you? Yes, Athena and her divine side, Hagia Sophia. I've grown used to doing this. I don't think it's necessary, but it's the method I've discovered for getting in touch with her. And now it's become a tradition in my life. You know who you're talking to, don't you? To Athena. I am Hagia Sophia. Yes, I know. The second time I danced at your house, I discovered that I had a spirit guide too. Philemon. But I don't talk to him very much. I don't listen to what he says. I only know when he's present. It's as if our two souls have finally met. That's right. And today, Philemon and Hagia Sophia are going to talk about love. Should I dance first? There's no need. Philemon will understand me, because I can see that you were touched by my dance. The man before me suffers for something which he believes he has never received, my love. But the man beyond yourself understands that all the pain, anxiety, and feelings of abandonment are unnecessary and childish. I love you. Not in the way that your human side wants, but in the way that the divine spark wants. We inhabit the same tent, which was placed on our path by her. There we understand that we are not the slaves of our feelings, but their masters. We serve and are served. We open the doors of our rooms and we embrace. Perhaps we kiss too, because everything that happens very intensely on earth will have its counterpart on the invisible plane. And you know that I'm not trying to provoke you, that I'm not toying with your feelings when I say that. What is love, then? The soul, blood, and body of the Great Mother. I love you as exiled souls love each other when they meet in the middle of the desert. There will never be anything physical between us. But no passion is in vain, no love is ever wasted. If the Mother awoke that love in your heart, she awoke it in mine too, although your heart perhaps accepts it more readily. The energy of love can never be lost. It is more powerful than anything and shows itself in many ways. I'm not strong enough for this. Such abstractions only leave me feeling more depressed and alone than ever. I'm not strong enough either. I need someone by my side too. But one day our eyes will open. The different forms of love will be made manifest, and then suffering will disappear from the face of the earth. It won't be long now, I think. Many of us are returning from a long journey during which we were forced to search for things that were of no interest to us. Now we realize that they were false. But this return cannot be made without pain, because we have been away for a long time, and feel that we are strangers in our own land. It will take some time to find the friends who also left and the places where our roots and our treasures lie. But this will happen. For some reason, what she said touched me, and that drove me on. I want to continue talking about love, I said. We are talking. That has always been the aim of everything I've looked for in my life. Allowing love to manifest itself in me without barriers, letting it fill up my blank spaces, making me dance, smile, justify my life, protect my son, get in touch with the heavens, with men and women, with all those who were placed on my path. I tried to control my feelings, saying such things as, he deserves my love, or he doesn't. Until, that is, I understood my fate, when I saw that I might lose the most important thing in my life. Your son. Exactly. He is the most complete manifestation of love. When the possibility arose that he might be taken away from me, then I found myself and realized that I could never have anything or lose anything. I understood this after crying for many hours. It was only after intense suffering that the part of me I call Hagia Sophia said, "What nonsense! Love always stays, even though sooner or later your son will leave." I was beginning to understand. Love is not a habit, a commitment, or a debt. It isn't what romantic songs tell us it is. Love simply is. That is the testament of Athena or Shireen or Hagia Sophia. Love is. No definitions. Love, and don't ask too many questions. Just love. That's difficult. Are you recording? You asked me to turn the machine off. Well, turn it on again. I did as she asked. Athena went on. It's difficult for me too. That's why I'm not going back home. I'm going into hiding. The police might protect me from madmen, but not from human justice. I had a mission to fulfill, and it took me so far that I even risked the custody of my son. Not that I regret it. I fulfilled my destiny. What was your mission? You know what it was. You were there from the start, preparing the way for the mother, continuing a tradition that has been suppressed for centuries, but which is now beginning to experience a resurgence. Perhaps. I stopped, but she didn't say a word until I'd finished my sentence. Perhaps you came too early, and people aren't yet ready. Athena laughed. Of course they're not. That's why there were all those confrontations, all that aggression and obscurantism. Because the forces of darkness are dying, and they are thrown back on such things as a last resort. They seem very strong, as animals do before they die. But afterward they're too exhausted to get to their feet. I sowed the seed in many hearts, and each one will reveal the Renaissance in its own way. But one of those hearts will follow the full tradition. Andrea, who hated her, who blamed her for the collapse of our relationship, who said to anyone who would listen that Athena had been taken over by egotism and vanity and had destroyed something that had been very hard to create. Athena got to her feet and picked up her bag. Hagia Sophia was still with her. I can see your aura. It's being healed of some needless suffering. You know, of course, that Andrea doesn't like you. Naturally, but we've been speaking for nearly half an hour about love. Liking has nothing to do with it. Andrea is perfectly capable of fulfilling her mission. She has more experience and more charisma than I do. She learned from my mistakes. She knows that she must be prudent, because in an age in which the wild beast of obscurantism is dying, there's bound to be conflict. Andrea may hate me as a person, And that may be why she's developed her gifts so quickly, to prove that she was more able than me. When hatred makes a person grow, it's transformed into one of the many ways of loving. She picked up her tape recorder, put it in her bag, and left. At the end of that week, the court gave its verdict. Various witnesses were heard, and Shireen Khalil, known as Athena, was given the right to keep custody of her child. Moreover, the head teacher at the boys' school was officially warned that any kind of discrimination against the boy would be punishable by law. I knew there was no point in ringing the apartment where she used to live. She'd left the key with Andrea, taken her sound system, some clothes, and said that she would be gone for some time. I waited for the telephone call to invite me to celebrate that victory together. With each day that passed, my love for Athena ceased being a source of suffering and became a lake of joy and serenity. I no longer felt so alone. At some point in space, our souls, and the souls of all those returning exiles, were joyfully celebrating their reunion. The first week passed, and I assumed she was trying to recover from the recent tensions. A month later, I assumed she must have gone back to Dubai and taken up her old job. I telephoned and was told that they'd heard nothing more from her, but if I knew where she was, could I please give her a message? The door was always open and she was greatly missed. I decided to write a series of articles on the reawakening of the mother, which provoked a number of offensive letters accusing me of promoting paganism, but which were otherwise a great success with our readership. 2 months later, when I was just about to have lunch, a colleague at work phoned me. The body of Shireen Khalil, the Witch of Portobello, had been found in Hampstead. She had been brutally murdered. Now that I've finished transcribing all the taped interviews, I'm going to give her the transcript. She's probably gone for a walk in the Snowdonia National Park, as she does every afternoon. It's her birthday, or rather the date that her parents chose for her birthday when they adopted her. And this is my present to her. Viorel, who will be coming to the celebration with his grandparents, has also prepared a surprise for her. He's recorded his first composition in a friend's studio, and he's going to play it during supper. She'll ask me afterward, "Why did you do this?" And I'll say, "Because I needed to understand you. During all the years we've been together, I've only heard what I thought were legends about her, but now I know that the legends are true." Whenever I suggested going with her, be it to the Monday evening celebrations at her apartment, to Romania, or to get-togethers with friends, she always asked me not to. She wanted to be free, and people, she said, find policemen intimidating. Faced by someone like me, even the innocent feel guilty. However, I went to the Portobello warehouse twice without her knowledge. Again, without her knowledge, I arranged for various colleagues to be around to protect her when she arrived and left. And at least one person, later identified as a militant member of some sect, was arrested for carrying a knife. He said he'd been told by spirits to acquire a little blood from the Witch of Portobello, who was a manifestation of the Great Mother. The blood, he said, was needed to consecrate certain offerings. He didn't intend to kill her. He merely wanted a little blood on a handkerchief. The investigation showed that there really was no intention to murder, but nevertheless he was charged and sentenced to 6 months in prison. It wasn't my idea to make it look as if she'd been murdered. Athena wanted to disappear, and asked me if that would be possible. I explained that if the courts decided that the state should have custody of her child, I couldn't go against the law. But when the judge found in her favor, we were free to carry out her plan. Athena was fully aware that once the meetings at the warehouse became the focus of local gossip, her mission would be ruined for good. There was no point standing up in front of the crowd and denying that she was a queen, a witch, a divine manifestation, because people choose to follow the powerful, and they give power to whomever they wish. And that would go against everything she preached: freedom to choose, to consecrate your own bread, to awaken your particular gifts, with no help from guides or shepherds. Nor was there any point in disappearing. People would interpret such a gesture as a retreat into the wilderness, an ascent into the heavens, a secret pilgrimage to meet teachers in the Himalayas, and they would always be awaiting her return. Legends and possibly a cult could grow up around her. We started to notice this when she stopped going to Portobello. My informants said that, contrary to everyone's expectations, her cult was growing with frightening speed. Other similar groups were being created, and people were turning up claiming to be the heirs of Hagia Sophia. The newspaper photograph of her holding Viorel was being sold on the black market, depicting her as a victim, a martyr to intolerance. Occultists started talking about an order of Athena, through which, upon payment, one could be put in touch with the founder. All that remained was death. But the death had to take place in completely normal circumstances, like the death of any other person murdered in a big city. This obliged us to take certain precautions. 1. The crime could not in any way be associated with martyrdom for religious reasons, because if it was, we would only aggravate the very situation we were trying to avoid. 2. The victim would have to be so badly disfigured as to be unrecognizable. 3. The murderer could not be arrested. 4. We would need a corpse. In a city like London, dead, disfigured, burned bodies turn up every day, but normally we find the culprit. So we had to wait nearly 2 months until the Hampstead murder. We found a murderer too, who was also, conveniently, dead. He had fled to Portugal and committed suicide by blowing his brains out. Justice had been done, and all I needed was a little cooperation from my closest friends. One hand washes the other. They sometimes asked me to do things that were not entirely orthodox, and as long as no major law was broken, there was, shall we say, a certain degree of flexibility in interpreting the facts. That is what happened. As soon as the body was found, I and a colleague of many years' standing were given the case. And almost simultaneously we got news that the Portuguese police had found the body of a suicide in Guimarães, along with a note confessing to a murder, whose details fitted the case we were dealing with, and giving instructions for all his money to be donated to charitable institutions. It had been a crime of passion. Love often ends like that. In the note he left behind, the dead man said that he'd brought the woman from one of the ex-Soviet republics and done everything he could to help her. He was prepared to marry her so that she would have the same rights as a British citizen. And then he'd found a letter she was about to send to some German man who had invited her to spend a few days at his castle. In the letter, she said she couldn't wait to leave and asked the German to send her a plane ticket at once so that they could meet again as soon as possible. They had met in a London cafe and had only exchanged 2 letters. We had the perfect scenario. My friend hesitated. No one likes to have an unsolved crime on their files, but when I said I'd take the blame for this, he agreed. I went to the place where Athena was in hiding, a delightful house in Oxford. I used a syringe to take some of her blood. I cut off a lock of her hair and singed it slightly. Back at the scene of the crime, I scattered this evidence around. I knew that since no one knew the identity of her real mother and father, no DNA identification would be possible. And so all I needed was to cross my fingers and hope the murder didn't get too much coverage in the press. A few journalists turned up. I told them the story of the murderer's suicide, mentioning only the country, not the town. I said that no motive had been found for the crime, but that we had completely discounted any idea that it was a revenge killing, or that there had been some religious motive. As I understood it, after all, the police can make mistakes too, the victim had been raped. She had presumably recognized her attacker, who had then killed and mutilated her. If the German ever wrote again, his letters would have been sent back marked, "Return to sender." Athena's photograph had appeared only once in the newspapers, during the first demonstration in Portobello, and so the chances of her being recognized were minimal. Apart from me, only 3 people know this story: her parents and her son. They all attended the burial of her remains, and the gravestone bears her name. Her son goes to see her every weekend, and is doing brilliantly at school. Of course, Athena may one day tire of this isolated life and decide to return to London. Nevertheless, people have very short memories, and apart from her closest friends, no one will remember her. By then, Andrea will be the catalyst, and, to be fair, she is better able than Athena to continue the mission. as well as having all the necessary gifts. She's an actress and knows how to deal with the public. I understand that Andrea's work is spreading, although without attracting unwanted attention. I hear about people in key positions in society who are in contact with her, and when necessary, when the right critical mass is reached, they will put an end to the hypocrisy of the Reverend Ian Bucks of this world. And that's what Athena wants. Not fame for herself, as many, including Andrea, thought, but that the mission should be completed. At the start of my investigations, of which this transcript is the result, I thought I was reconstructing her life so that she would see how brave and important she had been. But as the conversations went on, I gradually discovered my own hidden side, even though I don't much believe in these things. And I reached the conclusion that the real reason behind all this work was a desire to answer a question to which I'd never known the answer. Why did Athena love me, when we're so different, and when we don't even share the same worldview? I remember when I kissed her for the first time, in a bar near Victoria Station. She was working for a bank at the time, and I was a detective at Scotland Yard. After we'd been out together a few times, she invited me to go and dance at her landlord's apartment, but I never did. It's not really my style. And instead of getting annoyed, she said that she respected my decision. When I reread the statements made by her friends, I feel really proud, because Athena doesn't seem to have respected anyone else's decisions. Months later, before she set off to Dubai, I told her that I loved her. She said that she felt the same way, but added that we must be prepared to spend long periods apart. Each of us would work in a different country, but true love could withstand such a separation. That was the only time I dared to ask her, "Why do you love me?" She replied, "I don't know and I don't care." Now, as I put the finishing touches to these pages, I believe I may have found the answer in her last conversation with the journalist. Love simply is. February the 25th, 2006, 1947 hours. Revised version completed on St. Expeditious's Day, 2006.